Got a lot of auto jobs coming. Watch what's happening. The companies are coming in by the tens. You got to see what's happening. They all want to come back to Michigan and build cars again. You know why? Because of our tax and tariff policy.
Hoping to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. CBS's Anna Coren just visited Japan's equivalent of Detroit to see how these tariffs will impact Japan and Americans buying cars.
But they did roll them out yesterday, and it's really hard to overstate what a momentous moment this is for the U.S. automaking sector and the global automakers. Probably the biggest disruption since COVID, and perhaps since the North American Free Trade Deal was signed in the early 90s.
Neither a natural tragedy nor a financial crisis caused Detroit to become silent in the early 2025. A political choice was made. Instead of protecting American business, a broad 25% tariff started a domino effect that resulted in the loss of almost 38,000 jobs in a matter of months. The Midwest and Michigan assembly plants that had previously screamed day and night were silent. The area that many previously referred to as the heart of America's industry started to resemble an industrial cemetery as whole facilities went out of business. And the harm wasn't limited to just one brand. 7 of Asia's biggest manufacturers, ranging from Honda and Toyota to Mazda and Subaru, found themselves in a tight spot with billions of dollars in lost revenue leaking out of their balance sheets. Previously seen as pillars of stability, they were now confronted with a harsh question. How long might they survive under these circumstances on the U.S. market? And how much it costs the communities, suppliers, and employees that rely on them? The purpose of the tariffs was to safeguard. Rather, they forced businesses to go on the defensive, making cuts, reorganizing, and even thinking about pulling out. Was this the start of one of America's most recognizable businesses gradually collapsing, or was this really the cost of protection? Remember to use the like button before we begin. A simple like helps spread the word about this film to more people who should see it. Toyota's difficulties were the indisputable evidence that Detroit's silence was the first red flag. The biggest carmaker in the world, which has long been seen as untouchable, was the first to bear the full brunt of the levies. Once stable forecasts were abruptly lowered, with profit projections falling by over 16%. The corporation lost billions of yen as a direct consequence of Washington's new trade wall. Toyota's operating income had already dropped by about 11% by the second quarter to little over 1.1 cents in trillion yen. The shock was also felt by investors. The business's shares has fallen more than 10% since January, which is unusual for a corporation that sold more than 5 million cars in the first half of the year. It was a startling paradox. Sales were steady, but the pressure from tariffs caused profitability to plummet. For many years, Toyota was seen as an unstoppable force that could withstand any adversity. However, this industry as a whole received a worrying signal when even this superpower seemed vulnerable. What other chance does anybody have if Toyota can be shaken? Are you still with us? To ensure you don't miss what comes next, click the subscribe button. If Toyota's misstep rocked the world stage, Honda's predicament demonstrated how risky an over-reliance on the U.S. market had become. America made up 41% of Honda's global sales by 2025, a significant increase from 26% 3 years before. What had previously been a source of expansion has now become the biggest liability for the business. The blow was severe. Profits fell by over half in the first quarter alone, wiping off 125 billion yen, or around $1.66 billion. The setback demonstrated how tariffs might quickly transform a lucrative market into a financial sinkhole for a company that is so closely associated with middle-class consumers. The majority of Honda's cars headed for the US were put together in Canada and Mexico, which made issues even more complicated. Once hailed as efficient, that cross-border supply chain was now enmeshed in the web of tariffs and retaliations that were changing commerce in North America. Honda was compelled to withdraw rather than advance, lowering its goals, reducing expenses, and adopting a defensive crouch. Although Honda's withdrawal was agonizing, Nissan's tail made the human cost more obvious. The company was well known for making reasonably priced daily automobiles, but all of a sudden, The prices of those cars were too high for the very employees who used to depend on them. Long seen as a cost-effective choice at around $20,000, models like the Versa were abruptly hit with levies that increased the retail price by thousands of dollars. Even Nissan's own executives acknowledged the truth. The CEO of Nissan America issued a warning, stating that vehicles were rapidly becoming out of reach for the middle class. A declaration that struck a chord like a warning to families already facing mounting expenses everywhere. To safeguard its supply lines from Mexico and other countries, Nissan temporarily took on a large portion of the tariff burden. However, such a tactic could only be used for so long. Costs mounted, margins were reduced, and the brand's core U.S. market started to feel constrained. What happens if vehicles made for regular Americans are priced like luxury goods? If price was Nissan's issue, then logistics were Hyundai's. The corporation started reconsidering every shipment, assembly line, and supply channel after realizing the possibility of suffering significant losses. There have been rumors of a special tariff task force inside Hyundai, an emergency unit tasked with coming up with rapid solutions to a developing crisis. Moving the manufacturing of 16,000 Tucson SUVs from Mexico to Alabama was one of their first actions. An expensive shuffle that highlighted how precarious things had become. The stakes were really high. Approximately one-third of Hyundai's worldwide sales were reliant on the U.S. market. However, two-thirds of the vehicles sold there were imported. Overnight, that imbalance became vulnerable when tariffs were imposed. The markets reacted right away. The day the White House announced its tariff stance, Hyundai's stock fell more than 3%, indicating the company's true level of vulnerability. Hyundai's international activities were being immobilized rather than protected. Every change made to stay afloat in America had an impact on its global suppliers, investors, and factories. In reality, a strategy intended to protect American business was dismantling the networks that supported it. Kia made a different decision as Hyundai frantically tried to maintain its position. The business took advantage of the interruption to cut expenses and re-evaluate its distribution strategy rather than battling the tariff storm head-on. Reducing retail incentives provided an immediate buffer against growing losses and was expected to save over $400 million in the second half of the year. The ache was genuine, however. Kia lost over 25% of its earnings in the second quarter alone, which is equal to $570 million. Instead of completely fleeing, however, the brand stepped up its ambitions and set a daring goal to increase its U.S. market share from little over 5% to over 6%, a risk that few anticipated in such an unpredictable environment. However, the action beyond the U.S. border was perhaps the most revealing. Kia subtly turned a problem into a strategic opportunity by starting to reroute inventories into Canada. Ottawa provided a lifeline while Washington erected barriers, providing a market that was less antagonistic to international supply networks. Just over the border, what seemed to be a dead end in America was starting to take on the appearance of a fresh start for Kia. Subaru and Mazda took the blow in almost quiet, even if Toyota and Honda made headlines and Kia found a lifeline in Canada. Dependence on the U.S. market was more riskier for these smaller Japanese businesses since they lacked the worldwide buffer of their competitors. Subaru and Mazda relied mostly on American consumers, in contrast to Hyundai's diverse manufacturing centers and Toyota's global reach, and that reliance turned into a chokehold when tariffs were implemented. The figures conveyed a sense of suffocation for Subaru. The United States accounted for about 70% of its worldwide revenues, therefore the business had no genuine backup. Families who formerly considered vehicles like the Outback a mainstay of American driveways, to be practical and reasonably priced are now unable to buy them due to tariffs that increased average costs by more than $800 per car. Even the entry-level rims, which were previously Subaru's first line of defense for potential customers, started to vanish from showrooms as a result of being removed to preserve steadily declining profit margins. This abrupt exclusion from its most significant demographic posed an existential danger to a business that was founded on loyalty and steady development. Mazda faced a different, although no less catastrophic, problem. When tariffs slowed cross-border flows, its strategic dependence on Mexico as an industrial base failed in only 4 months. Shipments into the U.S. dropped by more than half. A collapse that left customers gazing at increased price tags and retailers with little inventory. The price of the once cheap Mazda 3, which was positioned as sleek yet economical, increased by about 20% from 2022 levels. What had been marketed as a vehicle for young professionals or families on a tight budget was now slowly moving up to a level that would have barred those specific buyers. Both brands were at structural risk in addition to financial risk. Subaru has long been known for its durability and close ties to middle-class, outdoor homes. Mazda, on the other hand, built its reputation on svelte styling and the assurance of high quality at a reasonable cost. However, both identities were now in danger as they had been altered by uncontrollable factors. Tariffs put pressure on loyalty in a market where it is difficult to gain but readily lost. The harm might go well beyond quarterly profits if Mazda's consumers thought the price wasn't worth it, or if Subaru's customers switched to rivals with less expensive options. It could weaken brand equity in general. Can these businesses ever regain their foothold on the US stage after that trust has been betrayed? Or will they be reduced to supporting niche companies in a sector that they previously thought was essential? On its own, the failure of 7 major automakers would be frightening. The more important question, however, is what will happen next. What does it say for America's other sectors, technology, energy, or even agriculture if even these titans may falter under protectionist pressure? The same measures intended to protect them are beginning to seem to have two sides, reducing U.S. competitiveness while promoting development in other regions. Investment capital and supply chains are already looking for safer locations. At a time when Washington seems unsteady, Canada in particular is quietly becoming a new industrial powerhouse in North America, absorbing output, drawing employment, and providing stability. The idea that the US may not be the most dependable location to create the future is strengthened by every dollar and job that moves north. Thus, the issue becomes more significant than automobiles, who would still have faith in the US's potential to lead the world if the car industry, which was once a symbol of power and innovation, were to collapse. There is more to the subject of tariffs and automobiles than simply automobiles and manufacturing employment. IT concerns the course of a country's power. Will other sectors adopt a similar strategy? Or will America be able to rebuild confidence before it's too late? Please like and subscribe if this video made you think in order to help fund future videos like it. I'm grateful.